Hey everybody, we're letting folks filter in, so we'll probably give it another minute and then get started. All right, I think we'll get started. Um, just one piece of housekeeping before we do. This is this is our first time using Zoom as a webinar tool, so there may be a glitch here and there. Hopefully, we've worked those out, but I just wanted to give a heads up to that ahead of time. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. This is our kind of first practitioner roundtable, and we'll be looking at conducting higher ed economic impact reports. So I'm Bjorn Markeson. I'm the academic divisional director and an economist here at IMPLAN. I've been with IMPLAN for almost 7 years now, working with our academic users. I'll be kind of our host today. And then I'm joined by three individuals. Kind of give them a quick introduction here, and then we'll jump right in. Um, Brian Lewandowski is the executive director of the Business Research Division at the Leeds School of Business at the University of Colorado Boulder. James McCafferty is the director of the Western Washington Center for Economic and Business Research at Western Washington University. And then Terry Rephann is the regional economist at the Weldon Cooper Center for Public Service at the University of Virginia. Um, so we like to keep our webinars interactive, allowing attendees to pose questions live to the presenters. However, the presentation might go a little long today, so we're going to ask that if you do have a question, please utilize the question box in GoToWebinar. We'll do our best to monitor the question box throughout the presentation. If you think you might want to ask a question, just make sure you have your control panel open by hitting the orange arrow on the upper right portion of the pop-out window. And then if at the end of the presentation, if we don't get to everybody's question, we'll follow up with folks and provide a response. So what are we going to cover today, and what are we hoping you'll learn? We want to really approach three things. One is how to approach university economic impact studies, what those studies look like, what they contain, who's engaged with them. Some things that you might want to include and might want to avoid, and then how to align the analysis with not just funding and policy goals, but university goals as a whole. Um, and then let's see. And then let me see. I'm going to get started here. So let's see. Quick question. So, can I ask a question in the chat? This is getting to our Zoom thing. Can everybody see the videos of our three presenters? I'm getting, is that okay? No. Uh-oh. All right.
It may be because we're not talking to them.
Okay.
They may just see your smiley face because you're the one doing all the chatting. And
All the
now
edit.
they're gonna know because
Okay.
now I've talked.
Perfect. There we go. Solved the problem. Thanks, Jay. Appreciate it. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of go through each of you to kind of chat a little bit about the work that you've done um, with a kind of a recent economic impact report, and then we'll get into some questions. And we can go kind of in the order that I introduced you. So Brian, if you want to go first.
Yeah, thanks, Bjorn, for the opportunity to be here. So I'm Brian Lewandowski. I'm the Executive Director of the Business Research Division at the Leeds School of Business, University of Colorado Boulder. And our research center is an applied research center. We've been around since 1916. And in that 110-year period, we have really been charged with serving the university and serving the greater Colorado community with applied business and economic research. I arrived here 20 years ago, and my center has had a subscription to IMPLAN for that entire period. So we've also watched and experienced IMPLAN evolve over time, and so I'm excited to share how we're using some of the tools that exist today. I began preparing the CU, or University of Colorado Economic Impact Study, in 2016, and now this has also evolved into an annual exercise that we update every fall. And we do this to bring awareness of the economic engine that the university is as a business. So thinking about as a business, it employs people, buys goods and services for operations, erects buildings, and invests in equipment. And so really that's what we're doing when we are estimating the economic impact. My school, the Leeds School of Business, has 5,100 undergraduate and graduate students, and I'm on a campus that has 39,000 students, and I'm in a system that has 68,000 students. So we have 4 campuses plus a system office. I'm at the CU Boulder campus, which is the flagship university in Colorado. We have the Anschutz campus, which is our medical school, medical campus. We have our Denver campus, which is an urban campus. And then we have a campus in Colorado Springs. So when we're doing this economic impact, we're really taking a look at not only the system as a whole, but the individual campuses. In addition to the 68,000 students that are on campuses learning, the system also has a research portfolio that totaled $1.7 billion in 2025. So as a system, total revenue was 6.7 billion in 2025, and we had expenses of 6.3 billion. And also to just talk about some of the metrics behind our economic impact, the system has 32,000 employees, plus an additional 20,000 student workers who are working very part-time. And those 32,000 employees are earning 4.3 billion in salary and benefits. So just thinking about the 4.3 billion, that demonstrates how labor-intensive universities are. That's where most of our spending goes, is to salary and benefits. So for our study, there are things that we include and things that we exclude from the research. We're including expenditures on education, on operations, on research, construction, clinical care. We also take a look at a segment of student and visitor spending. We're also taking a look at tech transfer, which is something somewhat new that we've done. And for that, we're taking a look at licenses, royalties, and some equity stakes. And one additional piece we also look at is the economic impact of the medical campus, including affiliates. So we've got other hospitals that are co-located on that campus. So we're also including that as an add-on that we separate out. A few things that we exclude from the analysis: we don't include the economic impact of alumni. So they earn their degrees, they seek employment afterwards, and they have these lifetime earnings. And we have always sort of viewed that as out of scope. We've also excluded visitors for athletic events, football and basketball, people coming from out of state or out of the region. We've excluded visitors for conferences and visitors for concerts. And really, the only reason why we exclude that is a data limitation. And we also exclude innovation broadly, similar to thinking about the downstream impacts of alumni. We exclude those broad downstream impacts of innovation that spawn out of the university, except for a piece of tech transfer that I'll talk about in a little bit more detail. So how do we do this? There's a couple of ways of doing this, and there's been some research done that says you can just sort of defer to the IMPLAN model for the trade flows and commuting patterns and wages and so on, and that's not too dissimilar than doing a really detailed economic impact. But we have opted to do a very detailed and comprehensive data collection for the studies that we do. And I believe that it adds a layer of rigor and credence to the work. So, I have the benefit of being internal at the University of Colorado, but we do this with other universities as well as an external agent. But when I'm doing this for the University of Colorado, I collect anonymized and detailed data on employment, wages, and expenditures by location. And I also have that data flagged for research or non-research activity. Then we're able to map that data. And by mapping it, we're able to pinpoint where activity occurs by county, by metropolitan statistical area, by U.S. congressional districts, by state house and state senate districts. And that provides a richness not only for the economic impact, but just for reporting out activity as we know it, the spending activity from the university. We model all of this using IMPLAN's multi-regional input-output to capture not only the activity that happens in individual counties, but to also capture the activity that happens between counties and between states. I think some of the newer advancements in IMPLAN that we've been able to leverage include some more sophisticated commuting adjustments. So we know where our employees are working, and we know where they reside. So making that commuting adjustment just allows us to better account for employees taking that income home and spending it in their home community. And so we model that as a household income change, and in IMPLAN we're able to adjust a commuting pattern to make that adjustment. For the university, we're modeling it in a few different industries. We model activity in professional, scientific, and technical services, really to model the R&D side. We're modeling education in education and healthcare and health. But we're also modeling construction activity above and beyond what sort of is part of the supply chain to operate a normal university. We know there are some extraordinary expenditures on construction. And since those industries are really private sector industries, we customize those industries to zero out taxes on production and imports. For the student and visitor impact, the university does a survey every few years where they are trying to understand students that would not have stayed in Colorado but for admission to the University of Colorado. And they also capture information on spending by type of goods and services that they're buying. So that's how we model a subset of student spending off campus. For tech transfer, this is a little bit above and beyond what we've done for the regular economic impact study, but we have looked at not only the expenditures from our tech transfer offices, but we have additional information about agreements with companies. And so when there's a licensing agreement with a company and they pay $20,000 for that license agreement, we consider that the market value of the research at that point in time. If that company starts to commercialize the data or the research and they start sending a royalty payment to the university, there's information we can glean from that too. If it's a 1% royalty and they send in $1,000 check, we know that sort of inferred market value is $100,000. So that's something downstream that we can understand too and quantify. And then something that's a little bit new for the university is taking an equity stake in some of these companies. So there's not really a royalty payment, but they own a piece of it. And so we have tried to model some of that as well. Just a few more things that I'd like to point out. When we're reporting out, we are modeling everything by county, but then we're able to aggregate that and report out for the metro areas where the universities exist. We are able to also quantify it by congressional district, which just is sort of added value to the university to be able to talk about the economic impact to multiple different stakeholders. When we
Excellent.
are reporting out, we provide a written report, but then we also summarize it in an infographic for each campus and for the university system, and we host it on our website. I think some other things that we could consider doing in the future is understanding the ROI of degrees. I know that the university system has been taking a look at this, so I think that would be a natural thing to include in this report. We can also include more on that visitor impact for athletics and concerts and conferences.
Thanks,
But
Brian. I'm gonna jump in here, and kind of pass the baton, if that's all right, to James. If you want to talk a little bit about how you kind of go about your work at Western Washington, looking at campus and university impacts, that would be great.
Definitely.
Thanks,
So
Brian.
our center, I'm going to put a link to our most recent in the chat just so people can have that for your, if you're having a hard time sleeping tonight and you're looking for something that may do the trick. So our research center at Western is we've been doing this kind of public facing, working with the public for a little over a decade. The center itself's been in existence for a long time, not as long as Brian. But we'd engage in a lot of different research projects for the general public. It's kind of our business model, if you will. We started, we'd been asked to do a impact studies for Western for a long time and always revolved around some legislative request or some construction project. And we struggled, honestly, with how to do them and do them well because your standard IO model that's, well, the university spends X, therefore the answer is Y, didn't seem to compare well with other universities. And if you're just looking at construction, a lot that's one-time kind of stuff, right? So we struggled our way through it. In looking for some better ways and better practices to look at doing this, connected up with APLU, the Association of Public Land Grant Universities, and really liked their framework for economic impact studies, which really is an economic activity study. And that phraseology is important because if you're a straight-laced econ person, that you kind of wrinkle your brow a little bit and go, wait a minute, but you can't take credit for these other things. Well, you can from an economic activity perspective as long as you don't do a really good job documenting it. And so we started doing these, I don't know, probably 6, 7 years ago. some of the differences between what Brian described and what we do look at alumni earnings, and this is a really bone of contention around around the university circuit. I'm very honest with you. There's a lot of universities that do take lifetime earnings, which to us felt very ridiculous. And so we stuck with in thinking about what seemed ethical to us, and we said, the difference of what we add really is that first year of earnings of a variance between what someone would earn in high school and occupation versus what they would earn on average entry level for a 4-year degree. And so we use a variety of data sources to find that variance um, and project based off of that. And then our theory is that the years after that really are the responsibility of the employers to add value. And so it's a fractional that we didn't get into. We do look at campus visits, tours, events, athletics, and that sort of thing. And again, in the report, we spell out how we unpack that and how we get to that. Western is a mid-sized university. We don't have the health services. We have a couple satellite campuses, but they're small. So it's not quite as complex, but it's all the same parts, which is the fascinating part. As you get together with other universities that do these, there's a lot of similarities. The numbers change around quite a bit, but that's it in a nutshell, Bjorn.
Excellent. Thanks, Jay. Terry, can you tell us a little bit of how you do things down at UVA?
Sure. So we recently completed a study, actually in December. It was released to the public, presented to the Board of Visitors. And before I talk more about that, I wanted to sort of like rewind a little bit and talk about some of the initial studies we did before this. We did an original UVA economic impact study back in 2007, and then the university did another study electing to go with a private consultant because their concern was that having an in-house study done was biased. So they got a private consultant. They basically produced similar numbers to what we did, and then they came back to us. But within that time period, we did a lot of other studies for other institutions. In fact, we did several studies of all statewide public higher ed, 20 plus institutions. And then we did one for James Madison University, and then we did the refresh of UVA. And one of the things you're going to spend most of your time collecting the data and building relationships with the people that you work with in the finance office. And sometimes there's a turnkey solution. Brian described what he described as really ideal. Being able to get that granular detail and do what is called a bill of goods approach, where you're actually constructing all of the inputs, mapping them on the IMPLAN categories at particular geographies and aggregating up and building this nice multi-regional model. For the higher ed study we did for all public education, public higher education, we relied exclusively on IPEDS data. Finance, human resources. And why? Because it's collected in the same fashion. And so we ran that at the institutional level across the state and produced institutional reports as well. For James Madison University, institution of about 23,000 students, 95% of them an undergraduate, one campus, one location. We were able to go to the finance office and basically extract from the general ledger all that data, map it using zips to the areas, and use a bill of goods approach. It was doable. Now back to UVA. UVA is not as big as Colorado State. It does have some of the same characteristics. It has a medical school, a health system, which is actually larger than the university in the way UVA is now, sort of a higher education attached to a hospital that has really increasingly statewide depth. In fact, one of the things that complicated our analysis is that it's growing and gobbling up private entities across the state, and integrating that accounting system has not occurred. It doesn't occur instantly. And so you also have at UVA various component units, sort of blended and distinct units, like the UVA Darden Executive School, and they've got a completely different system. The physicians group that does the billing that has a different system. Okay, so iPads isn't going to work for this. Bill of goods isn't going to, you're not going to get a turnkey solution. What you got to do is you got to develop a template and send it to the various units and say, we need the data in this format to be as consistent as possible. And so that's the approach we did. And as I mentioned, using IMPLAN is really straightforward. The online version, we go back to using the desktop version. The online version, once you get used to it, is really, really easy. Particularly the MRIO features runs relatively quickly. And getting the data in, you can get it in from spreadsheets and just if you have to adjust any numbers, just reload the spreadsheet. So it's really easy to use, but the data collection, you got to put a lot of thought into how to do that from the start. And so that in the process of doing that, James mentioned the APLU, AAU guidelines. You find their framework 2014, how to do economic impact studies. I saw in the chat somebody referenced, are we going to talk about private institutions? There's a good study that actually Candy Klaus did for Economic Development Quarterly, which really lays out how to do an economic impact study using IMPLAN for a small private college, which I think is must reading along with those APLU guidelines. I think if you have those two sources, you can determine how you want to approach these studies and avoid some of those pitfalls that Brian mentioned. So I'll leave that. That's my sort of overview, and we'll go on.
Bjorn,
So we got about
can I
yeah, please
dovetail on something Terry
go ahead.
said that is so critical that it sounds such a dumb thing, but when you start doing these studies, document exactly how data is getting pulled. Like I spent probably hours with our accounting folks and coming up with an exact data map from our chart of accounts in the university so that they could consistently pull me numbers year over year over year. Being really transparent about all the assumptions. I talked about visitors and things, and you'll see that in the report that I linked, that we really did try to transparently say, this is what we're counting. So that 5 years later, 10 years later, someone doesn't go, oh, I don't know how they came up with that number. Because we wanted it to be transparent. And if it's wrong, then that's fine. Let's have a discussion and debate that, right? But we wanted to be transparent about it.
Excellent. Thank you. No, that's really helpful. One thing before we get to some of the questions that are rolling in that I wanted to ask each of you is, kind of, what is often the impetus for doing these studies? Like we have a lot of folks that come in and ask us about, how do we use IMPLAN to do an economic impact study? And, the first question I always ask them is like, who's your audience? Like, what are you trying to do with this? So kind of, if you could each talk about a little bit about what these studies are used for once they're done and what the value of doing them is kind of on a year over year, whether it be every year or every few years, kind of show those changes over time.
Our impetus was that we got asked for it periodically. It always came at the last second, and it was always felt like it was a rush job. And so when we found the APLU framework, we also found the APLU Institutions of Economic Prosperity, which is a program that's available to non-APLU schools. Western's not an APLU school. And so we became the first non-APLU school with the IEP designation from APLU, which gave us access to a lot of things from APLU as well. Because of that program, you're supposed to go through this process as well. So it gave us cover for doing a completely different approach and methodology. And then we refresh this every about 3 years. The numbers don't change that much, and it's a lot of work. And so we have kind of held ourselves to this 3-year cycles to do them. to do that. Now, what's been interesting is actually not the impetus to do them, but what's happened since we did. So sitting down with our deans and walking them through the first one and having deans go, "Oh my gosh, this is exactly what I'm looking for. I can use this tomorrow." Um, I think a lot of people within the university sectors don't actually know the data can be helpful to them if they had it. And so that's what we have found, is that we have found a lot of traction after the fact rather than on the front end.
Brian, go ahead, Terry.
Well, typically the primary audience are local and statewide stakeholders, town gown issues, state funding. This year, the federal government funding has been a big issue in demonstrating the value to the feds. That typically hasn't been a problem, but with the yanking of research funding from major universities, particularly NIH and NSF, it stands to have an incredibly detrimental impact on higher education institutions, research institutions, and so they wanted to get the message out there that look at the value that we add, and not only using an IMPLAN analysis, but also a lot of descriptive data, of which James and Brian went over. This year also, there are some town gown issues that I don't know if all institutions are experiencing this, but the university is sort of encroaching on some neighborhoods. They tend to be sort of older neighborhoods. We have a major development going on in Ivy Road corridor, and it's displaced some older retail. And some local folks are outraged that it's being taken off the tax rolls, though what's going in its place is a School of Data Science, a Center for Performing Arts, Karsh Institute of Democracy, landscape improvement, student housing. I mean, literally $1 billion worth of construction going on and major research assets being built. And yet, so we needed to demonstrate to the community too that, hey, there are a lot of granted, some of these entities are not paying real estate tax, but the university does generate a lot of indirect and induced revenue that benefits the community. So it's not a liability to the tax rolls. And I think there's a lot of research on pilots that shows that they aren't, that they are beneficial for their community. So I just wanted to point out those sort of three different audiences that it's aimed at.
Excellent. Brian, I know you do some outreach with these studies as well. Could your experience match up with Terry and James on these?
Yeah, I think one additional component in Colorado is we have a smaller percentage of state funding that goes into the university than most states. And we're down to about 5.4% of our operating budget that comes from the state of Colorado. And so I think there's also that, again, that level of importance of expressing what the economic value is, not only to the locations where the university exists, but show how it spreads beyond the counties or the metropolitan areas, and that's what we've been able to do with this study.
Excellent, thank you. So a couple of the questions coming in. One of the things that has kind of come up across in a couple different formats is looking at kind of smaller subsections or smaller schools as a whole. Kind of the question about, is the approach different for a small liberal arts college than it is for a flagship state university? But also, do y'all have experience kind of modeling a college within a university, or in other words, subsets of the university, to kind of show the impacts of those parts?
So that's something we've done. We've done economic impact studies for other smaller schools around Colorado, and so I use the same bill of goods approach there. On campus, we've done work for the athletics office directly or we've done work for tech transfer directly over time. So I think the point of caution there is, to sort of caution someone from taking the university economic impact and then taking the athletics economic impact and summing the two, because there's certainly overlap between the two, and not 100% overlap, but there is a lot of overlap. So being clear about the time period that we're studying and where there is overlap is an important part of doing some of those subcomponents.
Terry, James, anything you want to add onto that?
I think Brian summed up what I would say. I mean, I think that it's scalable, right? I think that the size and the thing, but the double counting is going to be the biggest concern. And then when you get to construction, the concern is people interpreting that to be a ongoing impact versus a one-time impact. Construction jobs are always the thing that wrinkle my nose a little bit because, yeah, you could have build that huge building and create all these construction jobs, but for how long? I mean, some of those jobs are 2 weeks, right? And then they have to go on to a different job. And so that's where you start getting into some really hard discussions around how many jobs are really created. Define job, I guess, would be the
Right.
the question there.
Yeah, I guess another concern is separating out, the local students, the local visitors, that they're not an injection, that's more recirculation of existing funds in the economy. So you may want to treat them differently. And sort of a mechanical sort of, it ought to be, I mean, the documentation for IMPLAN is pretty clear. It makes it hard to make this mistake, but I know a lot of folks that use like RIMS multipliers. They don't use margins on like a lot of the spending, so they produce like these inflated multipliers. So make sure you margin your spending. It's not all that retail and wholesale spending is spent in the community. It's only the margin. So would just call your attention to that too.
Excellent, thanks. So two questions kind of on the fiscal impact side. The first one, for construction and perhaps operations expenditures that are provided by public or state dollars received, do you consider an offset of the taxpayer cost of those public funds? And also similarly, looking for at the fiscal impacts, are those because direct tax impacts are negative for public universities? Are they not included? Are they hard to quantify? How do you think about those fiscal impacts as a whole, or is that something that's kind of beyond the scope of these studies for y'all? Anybody want to jump at that one?
The fiscal impacts, we haven't been asked to do that analysis. I think that's a
Yeah.
slippery slope though, right? Because every state's going to have a very different tax, I use the word scheme, a very different tax landscape, but a rubric. And I think that how to apply that and come up with what an impact is becomes problematic. Like, so for Washington State, we have sales tax, right? We have B&O tax. We have these different tax streams then that you create when you spend dollars on the public side. Allocating that to be marginally correct would be challenging, but then I guess the slippery slope on a public policy side is if you did that agency by agency, you start to have conversations that might be really difficult. We haven't had anyone on the public side ask us for the analysis.
I would say that what complicates it. I have done offsets in terms of that, in a couple of studies, not in the UVA economic impact study. You're on a little bit of a slippery slope because, first of all, universities provide a lot of those services like public safety within the grounds and healthcare and all kinds of different things. In fact, they provide it for the community. They provide, Medicaid. There are a lot of indigent people that go to the hospital that the university has to absorb those costs, and they're enormous. They're enormous. They're tens, hundreds of millions of dollars in costs. They're far bigger than the city budget. Um, and there are these services, there's these internal costs, there's services that provide volunteer services and cultural contributions to the community. You start quantifying those things, you're into real work there, much harder than an economic impact study. You better have a lot of resources.
I have the benefit of knowing the exact amount of income taxes as paid by individuals, because I get that in the data file. But we still don't report it out. I've never been asked to do that either. Um, when I report taxes for other studies in Colorado, I try and focus on the revenue streams that are more discretionary in the state. So we look at income, property, and sales and use taxes. Because a lot of the other revenue tends to be more of a direct sort of fee for service. So that's my one recommendation, I guess, if you're doing a fiscal piece, is to focus on some of those largest and most discretionary pieces within your state.
Excellent. We got a couple questions that Jim tagged in the Q&A that James, you wanted to respond to.
Yeah, so there was a couple questions. So someone asked about, well, Adam asked about difference in higher ed impacts versus contribution analysis. There's another question that has a similar vein. So this goes back to my discussion about straight IO model, old school, right? You go back to econ, basic econ. You just take the university's books and you create a basic IO model out of that, and you're going to wind up with a very small number at that point, right? When you look at an activity study, which is the language that's used, and so we use the same language when we talk about ballparks and major public things. Taylor Swift rolls into your community. You can talk about economic activity, right? Because what you wind up with is people go out to restaurants, people go and do different activities around there, and it's not a but-for kind of equation, but you have a strong influence to it. Sporting events on campus is another great, we have a great basketball team and multiple other really well performing sports. People travel into town. So we get local people, but then we also have people that come and they stay, a certain percentage stay overnight, a certain percentage, it's a day trip, kind of thing. And so we've mathematically taken those based on data the university did have and built profiles for those. And we've done this for other clients. We just recently did a museum where we did the same thing, looking at where people came from and saying, hey, this person is going to have spent the night. Did they spend the night on their friend's couch? Did they go to a hotel? Like coming up with some form of structured approach that's again transparent, right? We don't hide this in the back of a file drawer somewhere. It's in the report. This is the assumptions we made to get here. And so that's how you come up with this economic activity bubble, if you will, of doing that through this. So you're building profiles of different folks that work on that. Rohan asked about working subsets of the university, and so he works in a city where they're interested about satellite campuses. And so this comes down to the financial records of the university more than anything else. And the HR records. Does HR have clear records of who works where? And the answer sometimes will surprise you of what a university knows and what it doesn't know. And so you really have to work closely with HR and with your accounting team to figure out if you're able to pull financial records, because that's where it starts. If you can't get the financial and HR records, the economic activity piece doesn't hold up very well because you don't know the rest of it to do that. So you have to know all those different components to there. Visitor spending, Madeline asked about visitor spending, and I think I covered this already. The affiliate institutions, the places that visitors and other things, activities, yes, those are all things that are fair game under the APLU guidelines. APLU would be quick to remind us all, because I've had this discussion multiple times. They're guidelines. The recommendation is not to go further than the guidelines, but if you want to dial it back to become more conservative in that approach. And I think that was all the ones I quickly flagged out of there, Bjorn.
Cool. Brian, there's been a couple of questions coming in looking at the tech transfer piece and kind of modeling that and thinking about that. Could you talk a little bit about your approach to that?
Yeah, so there's two pieces that are sort of the easier pieces. I mean, one is just their operations. We know their spending and employment and wages, and then the other one is licenses and royalties. And so the licenses and royalties piece, we know who the licensee is, and so we can model activity in that industry, and then we know either the direct license amount or the inferred commercial value based on the royalty payment. So that's what we're modeling there. The equity piece is sort of that third piece that's really difficult for me to wrap my head around how to adequately model that, because when technology leaves the university system, it might have sort of very little actual value at the time, but what they're giving up is a direct payment in trade for an equity stake. And there's been some home runs for the university where, went from a value of essentially zero to being hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars in equity, but there hasn't really been a flow of funds behind that yet. So that's a piece that we've described but haven't modeled the equity piece.
Terry and James, have you guys looked at that kind of the tech transfer piece at all?
Yeah, in a very basic way, I think similar to one aspect of what Brian's done. We have two entities. We have a licensing and ventures group that generates the typical sort of university license business spinoffs. And then we have an accelerator at the Darden School called iLab that takes student and faculty entrepreneurial ventures and puts them through a quick learning course, and they graduate. And so we tracked using confidential QCW records the employment totals. Typically, those they sort of those departments don't do that. They do keep track of some of the success stories, but they're not collecting performance outcomes on them, 10, 20 years after they are graduated from the incubator. So we followed up with them. It took quite a bit of time, and we counted about 1,000 jobs within Virginia that can be attributed to those two types, and then identified the NAICS codes that they were in and generated the multipliers, not including that as part of the economic expenditure, the expenditure of the university, but saying, these are some outputs of the university. They do contribute to employment. They do have multiplier effects. They wouldn't exist likely without the presence of the university and the services that and the research that was provided at the university.
Excellent, thanks. So we've had a couple other questions kind of about the geography piece of it. And so thinking about breaking out those impacts, one question was, looking at a public online university, they have a hub in a specific location, and they want to know the impacts to the state as a whole. Another question about, breaking out impacts by state legislative districts. And then a third about, do you ever get asked to kind of break down these impacts at a really micro level, like say a zip code level? So how do you guys think about breaking down those impacts and showing the impacts of a campus to a broader geographic region?
So that's exactly what we try and do. Again, we're sort of charged with estimating the economic impact by county, by state, House and Senate district, and then for the national districts, and for the metro areas where the universities reside. And so I end up breaking it down to the county level and modeling everything at the county level. there are I haven't modeled it in those districts because we'll get different values, and that's sort of an awkward thing if we have our total economic impact doing it the county MRIO summation versus doing the congressional districts. So I model it by county, and then I have spending and employment and wages by essentially by address almost. So we're able to pin all of that activity around the state. And then I know that there's a certain number of employees and wages and spending on one side or the other of a county, or one side or another of a congressional district or a state and house district. And so at that point, I just apportion things out. And that provides a clean summation then when no matter how we're cutting it up. So we're getting the same total. And I think the important thing there is that we're modeling it at the most granular level that we really can.
James, Terry, anything you want to add to that about kind of how you think about the geographic
No,
spread of those
we
impacts?
haven't been asked to do it, which I'm always thankful. I don't go begging for trouble as a general rule. So, I mean, I think the software allows, you can do a lot of different things through IMPLAN to help break that apart. We've had other projects where we do that, where we have a county that actually has a small island that happens to have a couple oil refineries on it. And so we've actually broken that island out of the county, for example. So it can be done. It's just a matter of pulling the data together. But as a general rule, the smaller and smaller slices of data you get out of a university, the larger the error rates are likely to hit. The data is not as clean as it looks at an aggregate level in general, just because of record keeping.
Right. I think some of the procurement data, it's going to vary by institutions. I know UVA in the last several years, just because there's been so much of focus on small business, minority procurement, and local procurement, they really cleaned up their coding system to accurately code where the vendors are. Otherwise, you're going to have in your system, they're all going to be in Chicago and New York and LA, right? They're all going to be these leakages, even though Aramark, they can't work from Chicago remotely. You can't change the bed linens and do all that that's happening right in your locality. So you have to go through and clean that up if it isn't good quality data. So yeah, we are not, I would say based on the current challenges in financial record keeping, we're not able to do that at confidently at a legislative district level or a county level. We're just not there yet. Maybe someday they'll develop the sort of data warehouse and high quality data, but I'll be gone by then. I'm sure.
Terry,
Hopefully
I'm
still
glad
alive. But
I'm glad you brought that up about the location of where some of these companies are. So one strategy that we deploy, we take the total procurement file and we sort it largest to smallest, and we take a look at the top couple hundred expenditures and see if any of those need to be reclassified to a Colorado location if they're out of state. And I think an example that I like to use, our energy provider is Xcel Energy. They're based in Minneapolis. So if the university's writing a check, it might go to Minneapolis, or I think it might go to Dallas even. But there's a regional headquarters here. All of that energy is produced in Colorado. And so that's an expenditure that I would reclass to Colorado. And if we do that for the largest items, I feel like we're picking up a good share of that. Not as worried about the $100 that we spend or $500 we spend. Worried more about the hundreds of thousands or the millions.
Excellent. Thanks. There's a question from Adam. Have you guys ever considered the value of extension and how that dissemination of knowledge impacts stakeholders through cost savings or increased revenue? James, I think you tagged
Yeah.
this as something you wanted to
So
follow up
Bjorn,
on.
I I would say that this kind of falls in the same logic bucket that we use with the small business development centers. So the SBDCs are major contributors to universities that have them because they are very good at collecting data. They collect from all the clients they ask for. Did you receive any loans in this business that we helped you with? Have you created jobs? They collect all this data. And so extensions can collect similar data of self-reported. And again, you just have to call it out as what it is, right? Like it's not a direct, the university didn't go out and invest $100 million in businesses. They assisted with it. But that is, and that gets us back to is it a but for or is it a well and kind of a scenario. But again, under the guidelines, those kinds of things are fair game from an economic activity report. So it comes back down to actually good data collection. And what's interesting is we're doing a couple projects right now with a couple other agencies that do the similar work that don't collect any data. And so we're having to go back to them and say, well, we can't really tell you what your investments are doing because you're not collecting any meaningful outcome data to analyze. And so going back to your extension programs and making sure they're collecting those kinds of bits of numerical data become really important.
Excellent. Thanks. So, two other quick questions, I think, and then we're probably gonna be close to out of time. One is, how do you handle dollar benefits to employees, especially if they're state employees? So, if a university has $1 million in paid wages, do you add some benefits piece to that, or how do you handle kind of the benefits piece to this with state employees? Is that something that comes up? How do you think about that? I don't jump at that.
So when we're modeling it, I just for the employees, I just model it as regular income, which includes the benefits piece. But importantly, when I'm doing that commuting adjustment, I don't want to assign all of that overhead to their home counties. So I'm modeling that as employee compensation. So that's literally how I do it. But I think, philosophically, it is what you're asking a little bit here. That's sort of as far as I've gone. I've seen in the university spending files, I can see what they're spending on, say, like the healthcare match. And so I'm trying not to double count that activity.
Yeah, for the UVA study, we used the detailed industry analysis, employee compensation to capture that. Now, I will say in the JMU study, they wanted to pull out the retirees. That's a little bit of a different dimension as part of their economic footprint. And so we had to go to the Virginia retirement system and get their data on the defined benefit plan payouts by locality. I know that's a little bit of a different, doesn't really address your question, but I thought it would be an opportunity to insert how, institutions approach their economic impact studies a little bit differently.
Bjorn, I have to go back and look. I'm gonna take the not quite a fifth, but I'm gonna have to go back and look at this because you can't treat it as just straight income as Brian was mentioning, right? Because the value of the benefits doesn't go into the household, it doesn't get spent that way. In our case, the majority of insurers that we have for employee benefits are based in state, so it's that money is funneling into the state and then back into the communities for healthcare. So I'll have to go back and look and see how we did this because I don't recall.
I have one more question that's come in fairly consistently, so I want to make sure we get to it, and then we'll wrap up. Can you talk a little bit about looking at when you're looking at, especially on a research expenditures piece, the facilities and administrative costs? So thinking about the money that's coming in from, say, federal grants and breaking that down into federal direct research expenditures and facilities administrative costs overhead for the university. How do you all think about that?
for us, that's just in the university's books, right? So the money comes into the university, but it flows back out as expenditures. So we just track the expenditures on the categorization that they've gone into. So it's a different number than saying, hey, we brought in this dollar amount for research is not where we're modeling the impact. We're modeling the impact from the university spending.
Yeah, same. All of that income, whether it's an overhead charge or not, it's being spent on people, goods, services. The way it's embedded in our data is it shows up as employment and wages, it shows up as equipment purchases, it might show up as new building construction. And so that's literally how it's modeled for us.
Yeah, I'm trying to think back how we did this. This was another data challenge. The definition of research and what a research staff is a research staff somebody that spent 10 hours in a calendar year on research? Is it somebody that had a sponsored program award? What portion of the payroll do you count for that? There's some real challenges. We relied actually on the NSF herd survey to get a lot of that information. I think they explicitly subtract out that overhead portion. I remember getting into the weeds in this and thinking, wow, this is really, really complicated. In fact, the university has a whole committee working on it right now on how to revamp how they measure that for financial and HR purposes and for this NSF reporting.
Terry, at the Boulder campus, I guess all of the CU campuses, all of the spending data is tracked by research or not research based on the accounting codes. So that's how I can at least look at the research expenditures. And then we make some assumptions about faculty, if they're research faculty or not.
Excellent. Well, we are up against time, and as I suspected, we didn't have any dead time on this one. A lot of good conversation. I really appreciate all three of you, Terry, James, Brian, for being here and doing this roundtable with us. And we'll wrap it up. And thank you very much.